Hi there, this is S.J. Thomason with Christian-apologist.com, and I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why I believe in Christianity. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, which I think is somewhat interesting, but maybe not unusual. So I was raised as a Catholic, and I had a lot of early spiritual experiences, and I decided to ignore those when I turned into my 20s. So I went to this church that you see right here. It's called Holy Angels, and that was in Illinois. And I went to a Catholic grade school, and I initially went to a Catholic high school for 1 year. And then I went to a public high school because my Catholic high school was all girls, and I didn't like that. So I switched over to a public high school. And early on, I had a couple of experiences. I had one when I was in college, which was amazing. I felt like I was in the presence of an angel. At the time, I attributed that to Mother Mary, but I'm not exactly sure, but I do know it was a woman. And it was one time at night, and she sat on my bed and she calmed me down because I was upset about something. And she just made me feel really good. And the next day I woke up and I felt very enlightened. But sadly, as I got into my 20s and my entire family, except for my sister, decided to leave the church, I decided to leave the church too. And so I just started waffling about for a while. And I decided that Eastern faiths were much more interesting than our faith. So I thought they're more exotic and they were superior. And I was reading a bunch of books by people from a bunch of different sorts of perspectives, like Deepak Chopra. I know that the crowd will find that very amusing. The Dalai Lama, James Redfield, Betty Eadie. She had this thing called Embraced by the Light, and it was a story of a near-death experience, and I thought it was fantastic. And I read Wayne Dyer and a lot of books by him, and he had some ideas about I think Taoism, and he had some Eastern faith ideas, and he basically said that no faith is superior. He put me into this idea that maybe Jesus really didn't resurrect, and these were all equal faiths of equal merit, and we had an equal opportunity to get to heaven. But since then, I've changed my mind. But I was constantly looking for the truth, and then what happened was, this is about in 2012. I had a very dark spiritual experience, and I was scared to death, and I felt like I was being suffocated. And what happened was, I started saying the Lord's Prayer just instinctively to be able to save myself or free myself from this awful suffocation. And I said it over and over and over until I was finally able to be freed. And so that opened my eyes and made me think, wait a second, maybe we need to be going back to the church. And around that same time, my son said, Mom, can we go to church? How come all the neighbors are going to church and we're not going to church? And you're taking us to the big pool that day because no one's there. That's what you're saying. And you think that's funny. And I did think that was funny, but it wasn't the best thing. So I stumbled into this little church right here, which has since expanded since this picture was taken. And they had a mission as a church to build bridges that connect people to a passionate life in Christ. And as I went in there, it was a Baptist church. I just loved the contemporary music. I loved the feeling I got. I remember listening to Matt Redman and Chris Tomlin and some other really good Christian contemporary singers. And I thought, geez, the Catholic Church isn't at all like that. The Catholic Church is very solemn and hymn-based, and the sermons were always very short, at least in the ones I went to. And this sermon was about 40 minutes, and they really dug deeply into the Bible. And so they dug so deeply into the Bible that I was convinced I needed to get baptized again. And so right around that same time, I went and I got baptized again. But I still was questioning. Even though I did that, I was still questioning. I wasn't sure about my faith. And so I asked God, I said, listen, can you just give me another sign? I really need a sign. I need to have some evidence. Please help me out. And so what happened was, then I went onto an airplane, and I was flying on a work trip, actually. And I spotted this man that you see pictured here in the airport. And his name is Pastor David Miller. And what happened was, he was sitting in the airport, and the next thing I know, he and his wife, who's pictured with him right here, her name's Leslie, were sitting right next to me on the airplane. And he was in the middle seat, I was on the aisle, and Leslie was in the window. And he struck up a conversation with me, and he basically said, what do you want to do? What's your goals? That sort of thing. He told me he was a pastor, so I told him about my church experience. And I still had questions, and he asked me flat out, he said, is Jesus your Lord and Savior? And I was kind of shaky. And I said, yeah, just really unsure of myself, still unsure. And so then he said, well, he asked me more about myself, and I told him about how I wanted to author some children's books that were similar to C.S. Lewis's children's books, like the Narnia Chronicles. And he said, have you read the C.S. Lewis's adult books? And I said, no. And so he guided me I ended up getting off the plane and immediately buying this beautiful book. And this book right here It's called the Complete C.S. Lewis Signature Classics. And the great thing about it is it has Mere Christianity, Screwtape Letters, and The Great Divorce, among some other really good books. And so I read Mere Christianity. And he also asked me about another thing. He said, have you ever heard this verse? And I'm going to go into that in just a second. But I read Mere Christianity and I got to this particular passage. And it said, a man who was merely a man and said the sorts of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on a level with a man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come to any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. So all the beliefs I had through my 30s of him being a great moral teacher were basically squashed with this particular statement. And it was really opening for me, really eye-opening. And then what the pastor did, which was really interesting, is he read this part of Isaiah 53 to me, but he had it memorized. And so he just said, well, who am I describing? He said, he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. And by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned our own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. And I said, well, that's obviously Jesus. And I thought that must be a reference in the New Testament. And he said, no, it was written around 700 years before Jesus walked the earth in the Old Testament by one of the prophets. And that wasn't the only passage. There were a whole bunch of other prophecies of Jesus that he had fulfilled. And so I was just absolutely stunned, shocked, actually. I was shocked. I got off the plane. And the first thing I did was to get onto my computer when I got to my hotel room and to look up Isaiah 53. And then I looked up Isaiah 53, whether it was in the Jewish scriptures. And to my complete shock, I found it was. And I thought, oh my gosh, how can they read this passage and not see Jesus Christ? Came to find out later that the Jews for Jesus used this passage to bring a lot of people to Christ. So then I had a dream of Jesus. And so right around this same time, I had this dream and Jesus appeared and we were all at a party in the dream. And it was actually at my mother-in-law's house. And it was a lot of my new friends, my old friends, a whole bunch of people were at this party. And we were just having a good time and hanging out and relaxing and just taking our own sweet time with our lives and not really doing anything very important, but just, and definitely not focusing on Jesus. And Jesus issued a challenge and he basically challenged me to be a better person and to live my life a little more structured, following his principles. And so and he looked like this in the dream. He was facing, he was kind of facing a different direction, but this is how he looked in my dream. So that's when I found this picture online, I thought, wow, I'm just going to use that picture quite a lot. That's how he looked. And then another time I had a super interesting dream. I was running with a woman, and the woman is a 96-year-old little lady who lives in my neighborhood, who's a Jewish woman. And she right now is very frail and she uses a walker and all that kind of stuff. But in my dream, she wasn't. She was very strong. And she led me up into the sky. I held onto her coattails basically to fly into the sky. And the next thing I know, we opened this door and we were in this beautiful library with tons and tons of books, and it kind of looked like this particular picture here. And it was absolutely stunning. And I thought, this is heaven. This is so nice. I really liked it there. And then what happened was suddenly my dream changed. And I found myself running on a road back on Earth. And the little old lady wasn't there anymore. And I was being chased by a whole bunch of people. And they were throwing these things at me that looked like this picture. And they were yelling the word anvil. And so I thought, anvil. So I wake up and I looked up and I thought, isn't that like a Bugs Bunny tool? So I wake up and I look at I look it up on the internet. I go up and I look anvil up and I find a whole bunch of, apparently they're ancient tools that were used. And that is what these demons were throwing at me in this dream. It was really an awful dream. Luckily, I think I got away from them, but it is probably some sort of a message to me of trying to get away from people who do want to hurt me. So that was something that came out. And then I had a vision once when I was driving and I saw a cross in the sky, and I just found a picture like this that looked kind of like it, but it was a chunky, well-defined cross in the sky. I reached to get my cell phone to take a picture of it and it dissipated too quickly, but it was a pretty neat thing. I saw it on my way to work one day and it was pretty Awesome. I also saw another vision, another time where I was looking into the sky and I saw this window and it sort of opened and I saw these figures that were all dressed in light. Really fascinating. Um, but probably the most interesting spiritual experience I had was I was in a hotel room in San Antonio in late September of 2016 at a conference. I was at this conference with the National Society for Experiential Education, where I used to be the president, now I'm the past president. But I was at this conference and I was sitting in the room, in the hotel room. I was all by myself. And I was just thinking about my life. And this was in the daytime. This wasn't at night. It was in the daytime. And I was just reflecting on my life and thinking about things and kind of trying to put it together. And somebody once said I had a TV on. No, I didn't have a TV on. In fact, I can't stand the television and I definitely don't play it when I'm in my hotel room. That's the last thing I want to have making noise in the background. So I was by myself and I heard a voice very specifically correct me and reason with me on why these ideas that were in my head were awful. And so I listened to the voice and I took the lesson, and I'm glad I did because it really helped me later on. I would have made some choices that could have been bad, and I decided not to. So one thing that was pretty neat was I was reading Hugh Ross's book, and in one of his books, he pointed to a Bible verse that talked about the Lord rebuking you. And Hugh Ross is a cosmologist who also mentioned that the Lord rebuked him and told him one time that he needed to be changed in some way. And so I thought this Bible verse was pretty neat, and I thought it's something that made me feel pretty good. And it says, "My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son." So I thought that was pretty neat. And there's a few verses in the Bible that are like that. So then I got to Twitter, and right around these times, I decided that I was going to go on Twitter and spread the good news because I had had these spiritual experiences, and now my eyes were open to Christianity. I had been born again. I was super happy. I thought everyone was going to listen to my stories, and I found that nobody who's an atheist really did. And I discovered lots of atheists. So I dove into apologetics and started reading all the typical arguments. So I'm just going to give a couple of them. The cosmological argument says everything that begins to exist has a cause. We know that the universe, through the Big Bang, began to exist, and time, space, and matter had a start date. Therefore, it has a cause, and therefore the cause has to be outside of the universe or transcendent to it, timeless, spaceless, and immaterial, along with intentional and powerful, and that would be God. And then there's the moral argument. It says, if we have objective moral values and duties to do what's right, a transcendent moral lawgiver exists. And many academic studies have pointed to the fact that we do have objective moral values and duties to do what's right. There's a number of studies that have pointed to our global duties, for example, to follow the golden rule. And that is transcendent to religions, eras, and cultures. And so if we have these transcendent objective moral values, which means we have these values that don't change as a function of any one person's opinions, then we must have a transcendent moral lawgiver who disciplines and wants the best for our spiritual development. And that would be God. And then I also looked at the arguments for Jesus Christ. And these are some of the minimal facts that people have accepted, even if they're secular, surrounding Jesus's crucifixion. So we know he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. You can see Josephus for that. We know that women were the first to discover his empty tomb, and no one claimed he was buried anyplace else until around 1700 years later. We know his dead body was never produced. We also know that the Jews and the Romans were very hostile towards him. So you can only imagine that they were certainly searching for his dead body so that they could produce it and get rid of this whole new movement that they sort of scorned. We also know that all four Gospels attest to the fact that Jesus is risen. Paul, who once hunted and persecuted Christians, indicated he saw the risen Christ in 1 Corinthians 15, along with 500, including the 12 apostles. We also know the early Christians, including Paul, Peter, Stephen, and James, were often beaten, jailed, stoned, hung on crosses, or beheaded. And examples can be found in Acts, the epistles, and external writings by Polycarp, Pliny the Younger, and Tacitus. We also know that Christianity was not legalized until 313, so we weren't given any legal protection. So there were sporadic persecutions of Christians depending on which emperor was in office. Christianity, unlike other faiths, started as a religion of peace. This is a great way to speak to why we don't follow the Muslim faith. They started as a religion of war right from the get-go. But Christianity was the idea of living by the sword was not going to work. Jesus said, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. And of course, later after 313, Christianity did get somewhat brutal in some cases. However, again, in the very first few hundred years, it was a very peaceful sect. And also, you'll notice that by 313, Christianity had between 5 and 6 million adherents, people who believed the message because they had faith. And it speaks to something that Gamaliel pointed to in Acts 5. He said, he was talking about Gamaliel was a Pharisee, and the Pharisees had captured Peter and another apostle. And Gamaliel said, listen, let these men go. If their faith is based on God, you won't be able to stop them. Well, clearly you can see by 313, even though they didn't have legal protections, 5 to 6 million people were following Christianity. And then if you go to after legal protections, around 50 million in the middle of the 4th century were following Christianity. Some might say, well, now you're talking about in the Bible stuff. Well, we also have external support for Jesus. We know that he lived during the time of Tiberius Caesar. He was virtuous, a wonder worker. He had a brother named James. He was acclaimed to be the Messiah. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. An eclipse and the earthquake occurred when he died. He was crucified on the eve of the Jewish Passover. His disciples believed he rose from the dead. They were willing to die for their belief, and Christianity spread rapidly. And his disciples denied the Roman gods and worshiped Jesus as God. So we know that from external sources. So even if we didn't have the Bible, we have enough support for Christianity. One of the reasons that I follow Christianity, I'm going to get to questions at the end of this. I'm going to go back to the other screen and get to questions in a moment. But one of the reasons I follow Christianity is because of these verses, to whom much is given, much will be required. I realize that I've been given a lot. I have a very good life. I've been blessed in many ways, and I have to give back. And I'm starting late, and so I have a lot of time to make up for. And it says also in another verse, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So why do I reject other faiths? For our Father to be perfectly merciful, forgiving all sin, and perfectly just, punishing all sin, one blemish free or without sin, who could bear the sins of the world, would need to pay the price to humanity to uphold this moral law. No other faiths have Jesus Christ or an immanent and transcendent Lord. The Muslim Allah is transcendent to our universe. He doesn't interact with people. Pantheism is based on gods that are immanent or present inside of our universe. And also they had start dates as our universe did. Mormonism is based on the testimony of Joseph Smith, and some of his earliest supporters recanted their testimony of the golden plates, which is something to note. So these are all faiths that I would say you need to reject. I could probably go on and investigate other faiths and say they should also be rejected. But no faith, no matter what the faith is on the earth, whether it's paganism or it's Buddhism or Taoism or Confucianism, and a lot of those aren't even faiths based on a deity, but no other faith has Jesus Christ, who is the Word, and the Word became flesh. The Bible's also very unique. It was written over 1,500 years with 40 or more authors from 3 continents and in 3 languages. It's a best-selling book of all time, according to the Guinness Book of World Records. It also contains 330 prophecies, which Jesus fulfilled. So you say, well, what did the Jews think about Jesus? They thought the world was going to exist 6,000 years, 2,000 years of desolation from Adam to Abraham, 2,000 years of Torah from Abraham to somewhere around the beginning of the Common Era, and 2,000 years of the Messianic era, roughly the last 2,000 years. But because our iniquities were many, all this has been lost. So this is what the Jews came up with when they realized that all of the prophecies that had pointed to start dates for Jesus's ministry and that sort of thing had not been fulfilled according to them. So they just threw away their own book. They said that is the course the history was to take, but due to our sins, that time frame increased. The Messiah did not come after 4,000 years passed, and furthermore, the years that elapsed since then, which were to have Messianic era, have elapsed. So that's what they said after the fact, when they realized that if we look at, for example, Daniel 9, which I'm about to show you, that Jesus had to appear in the temple, and the temple was destroyed in the year 70. So in the Old Testament, the Messiah is described in 2 ways, both as a humble and suffering servant and as a mighty king and conqueror. We've got references from Zechariah and Psalms and Isaiah. And in Micah 5, we learn that the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. In Daniel 7, we're told he'll arrive by coming in the clouds of heaven. In 9, we're told he'll be cut off from humanity, while in Isaiah 9, we're told he'll live and reign forever. How do we reconcile these? Well, we reconcile them by looking at even what the early Jews said. They said, if the people will be righteous, the Messiah will come in the clouds of heaven. If they will not be righteous, he will come as a poor man riding on an ass. He actually reconciles those. First, he came as a suffering servant. Later in the end times, he's going to come as the glorious king. And he's going to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. His crucifixion was the sacrifice of the strongest for the benefit of the weakest, which is an inversion of the survival of the fittest concept in Darwinian evolution. On Calvary, he reconciled God's perfect mercy, love, and justice. We know from Isaiah 7:14, he was to be born of a virgin. And from Isaiah 9:6, he would be a wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. This also predicted his birth. We know from Daniel 9 that there was a very specific time when the anointed one would appear in the second temple, which Daniel had also prophesied was going to be built. And it was built and it came to be and it was destroyed in the year 70. But we know if we track the timing that's pointed out in Daniel 9, that Jesus was supposed to appear in the spring of the year 33, because we start with a 444 BC start date, which is the time the word went out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. And there's a couple of other options, and I've explained in other videos why that's a good, appropriate start date. But it leads us, when we use a 360-day calendar for, which was a Jewish calendar, it leads us to the year 33. And we have multiple sources indicating that the year 33 is the year that Jesus was crucified. They group these 77s of years as a period of 490 years. And they also note that the purpose for Jesus was to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to atone for our iniquities, and to bring an everlasting righteousness, and to seal up vision and prophecy and anoint a most holy place. So Jesus had to appear in the second temple with the Romans destroyed in 70. And again, they also divide this up so you can look at the very specific information about the years. But if you calculate it out at 483 years from 444 BC, using that 360-day calendar, you'll be put to the date I spoke of. And Malachi 3:1, I will send my messenger who will prepare the way for me. Then suddenly the Lord you are seeking will come to his temple. The messenger of the covenant whom you desire, come, said the Lord Almighty. So imagine how Jewish people feel when they see these kind of passages and they think that the temple is obliterated in the year 70, and they say, oh no, the Messiah had to have come prior to that. That dates the Messiah. And that's why they reconstructed their views in the Sanhedrin, which I just pointed to. So in Isaiah 42, we also know that the Lord was to be a covenant for the people and a light for the Gentiles to open eyes. So we also know that he was not just for the Jewish people, he was coming for everyone. And we know from Zechariah 12:10, Isaiah 53, and Psalm 22, which I'll show in a second, that he was supposed to be pierced. People were going to grieve for him. He was pierced on the cross, as you know. And we also know that he was scorned by everyone. He was mocked, he was insulted, and he called our attention to Psalm 22, which was written about 1,000 years prior to his appearance on the earth. My God, why have you forsaken me? That brought us exactly to that passage, which describes the crucifixion and the whole process surrounding that, which we have backed up in the Gospels. So in conclusion, when we ask, knock, and seek, Jesus opens the door, but we need patience. I had to have patience for over 20 years. He does it on his time when he thinks we're ready. He answers life's biggest questions about our origins, purpose, destiny, morality, and meaning. The Old Testament paved the way for Jesus with a multitude of very specific prophecies, which he fulfilled. So no matter where you are now, it's never too late to accept Jesus's offer of salvation. Even the thief on the cross next to him was given salvation. So that is where I'm going to get to the questions or comments. So I'm switching my screen back to you guys. Hold on one second to find where I was. There we go. Okay, so let me see if you have any questions. So I see that we have a few people. Nathan, I just spoke to on the phone. We've got Brian Stevens. I also see you here, and I see a few other people. So would you guys like to ask any questions? Brian, do you have a response? I actually, the two people I see, John Lloyd is also here, Samson Tashome, thank you, and DJ Roush. I think a lot of you guys are atheists. So what did you think about this? Can you be specific on the experience with the angel on your bed? The angel on my bed. Oh, okay. Yeah. So when I was in college, I was up in the middle of the night, and I was sitting on my bed, and I was sort of upset about something. I've had a history of pretty bad skin. I've got an autoimmune condition, psoriasis, and I was pretty upset about that. And suddenly this woman appeared on my bed, and it was kind of like a spirit, not a physical body, but like a spirit. And and she comforted me. She put her arm around me and she said, don't worry, it'll be okay. And I felt really good the next morning. So then she sort of disappeared, and I woke up and I felt really good. And some might say that was a dream. I'm not sure. And to be honest, it changed me the next day. I remember walking around the campus at Florida State University and feeling very clean. And I felt like the grass was greener and the flowers are prettier. I felt, there's this cleanliness. And it was interesting because a couple of months later, I received this book anonymously. I don't even know where it came from, but obviously a friend in the mail sent me a book on some of the things that related psoriasis to consumption of certain kinds of food. So that day I gave up pork, and I haven't had pork since. It's one of the worst contributors to psoriasis, but I also made some dietary changes with sugar and other things that really helped my skin to get a lot better. And so it was a pretty neat adventure that I had. The sad thing is I sort of forgot about it. And so I decided I don't want to forget about any of these things anymore. So that's the deal. Did I ban Sandra again? Yes, I did. I banned Sandra. I'll have to allow Sandra back. We have this strange relationship where sometimes she's really nice and sometimes she's not very nice. So I'll go find her after this and bring her back. So what do I think is the strongest argument against Christianity? If people could prove that Jesus didn't resurrect, that would be the strongest argument against Christianity. So if we didn't have the evidence that we didn't have the early apostles, for example, testifying that Jesus resurrected and then living their lives accordingly over decades while they were being beaten and stoned and things like that, I think that would be pretty compelling. And I think that if that were present, that would be strong evidence against Christianity. So if we had something like that. So, but bacon, okay, Brian likes bacon. So I have turkey bacon if I want to have bacon. So how do I know it was a woman if it wasn't physical? Because it was a woman's voice I heard. So I heard a woman's voice and not a man's voice. So, and the minimal facts, the nice thing about the minimal facts is, and I know a lot of people say, well, in and of themselves, they might not prove that he resurrected, because if I just said he died and they couldn't find the body, you would say, well, that could have happened to a lot of people. You could die and not find the body. So you have to take the minimal facts all together and then try to come up with a unified explanation of all of them. And when you look at all of them, the best explanation is that he resurrected. And I know it's an unusual explanation. It's certainly not mundane, as some people would say, but it's definitely the best explanation. So let me see what else. Oh, it's just Samson is like me, except he's never had pork. See, I stopped when I was about 22. So I think we can't prove he did or did not resurrect. Brian Stevens says, with that said, we have no good evidence people can come back from being dead. Well, that's the whole foundation of Christianity. If he didn't come back from the dead, we have no good reason to be a Christian. So that's certainly the case. So what advice would you give to a person who hasn't had spiritual experiences? Pray. I would say pray and read the Bible. I know that doesn't sound good if you're a person who doesn't believe and you say, I can't pray when I don't even believe. But when you pray, you open the door. It reminds me of something I heard this morning. I'm trying to remember the name of the person. Oh, I can't remember it. There was a story I heard. Oh gosh, this is terrible. I can't remember the name. It was something like Lennon or Linton, but there was a person who was a missionary in another country, and that person thought he was going, oh, I know where I heard it. I heard it in my church. So I was listening to a sermon that I had to miss because I was out of town. So I was listening to this sermon, and they were talking about a person who was a missionary and his family, and he had been threatened by these people on this island where they were located. And they told him that they were going to kill him. And so he realized he couldn't get off the island in time. So he and his wife and just sat and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. And then that night they saw this lights coming towards them of these people on the island who were going to kill them. And as these lights were getting forward, he was still praying and praying and praying. And what happened was suddenly the lights got dimmer and they went away. And he didn't know what happened, but they were protected and nobody nobody was killed. And so then what happened was he, about a year later, he was able to convince a leader in this island community to turn his life over to Christ. And he asked him, he said, well, what happened about a year ago? You said we were going to be killed. And the leader in this community said, well, we were approaching you, but what we saw when we got to your house was a bunch of people dressed in white with swords, and we realized we couldn't take them, so we had to leave. And the interpretation of this is that this was God's angel army, and so it's a pretty interesting thing. So can I say anything about miaphysitism or duophysitism? No, I'm not sure I know anything about that. Samson, can you elaborate a little bit? I'm not familiar with those terms. And then Brother John, wouldn't a stolen or cremated body be a better explanation? You're asking to prove a negative. Well, they would be, that's the interesting thing is in the Bible, people talk a lot about, even the Jews said somebody must have stolen the body. So that's what they said is the explanation. But the idea with that is, wouldn't one think that in a time where the Jews were severely persecuting Christians and the Romans, especially people like Nero, were severely persecuting Christians, wouldn't you think they would do anything they could to find the body of Jesus if the body were present somewhere? And so you would certainly think that. And I'm not sure we have evidence of cremations back then, but you could inform me if we do. So that's just something to mention. So Ginger Ale says, Brian Stevens, Jesus resurrected and it's not according to our understanding of science. And I think that's a good point, because a lot of people say, well, of course we can't take that Jesus resurrected because people don't come back from the dead. Well, that's exactly the idea, because Jesus is the Lord, and this is the Lord's way of showing us that he's not subject to the physical laws of our nature. He's the one who created them. So certainly he can do things outside of them. So what else do we have? So if Samson elaborates, the incarnation of Jesus, is it two natures or a nature that is composite from the two, a fused nature like the one the Coptic Church teaches? That's a good question. I'm not, I really need to look into that. I'm not sure of a good answer for that. I'll have to look at that. It's my understanding, he just became flesh, he became one with the Father, and the Father and the Son are one. It's a very difficult concept for us to understand, is this idea of the Trinity, where you have these three people in one. And I think a good way to do it is looking at the three-leaf clover that St. Patrick used to use. But it is a very complex subject, and it's something that obviously when we get to heaven, we can ask a little bit more information about it, because it's hard to sort of understand. And the Catholic Church, yeah, I grew up in the Catholic Church, so that's certainly something that happened. What page do you want me to look at here? You did supply a NASA document. So if those of you in the audience, why don't you vote? What do you think is one of them? You asked me what the argument against Christianity is. What would you say is an argument that you think strong in favor of either God or more specifically Christianity? So I haven't seen the show The Chosen. No, I really don't watch TV terribly often. So it's on a lot at my house, but it's on with my husband's choices of what he likes watching, which usually don't align with what I like watching, because I don't like Fox News. Okay, how about earlier claims of rising God and men, Osiris and Horus? That's an interesting question. A lot of people point to that, but what they found in those claims is they aren't like Jesus. So that's the thing. There's people who've studied those, and there's a few people that I've interacted with on Twitter, like J. Warner Wallace, who's written articles on that, and others. And so I would say that I'd probably refer you to look at some of those articles on that, when they show that it's not really a very good correlation of these two. The moral argument, Jorge is saying, I think that's a good one. Kalam leads us to a cause. I think that's reasonable too. So I think when I first heard the Kalam, I was pretty excited about that. And then I got to, I found the moral argument, and I thought that was very compelling, but a lot of people don't think the moral argument is very compelling. So that's actually what I've been working on the most in my academics. I'm trying to write papers on the moral argument, not related to God so much, but just talking about the influence of deontological ethics and consequentialism and how they work. So to answer your question, the argument from design was persuasive. Oh yeah, I didn't even include that one, but that's a really good one too. When people look at our DNA and they say, if DNA, our human genome, well-ordered 3.5 billion symbols or letters or whatever, people point to that and say, well, if there's that design, there must be a designer. So I think that's pretty compelling. So Brian Stevens says, going from the Kalam to show there could be a God is one of the best strategies. Yeah, I think Fox News is horrible too. Yeah, so no, I agree. So actually in the book I'm writing, I'm working on a book that's called Christianity Matters. I start off with the God. First we have to say we have a creator, and I go through the cosmological and the teleological and different arguments until I get to, and the moral argument, and then I get to the arguments for Jesus more specifically. So that was definitely something. And Samson says, the doctrine of the Trinity makes perfect sense. It's consubstantiation. Now, Samson, I'm wondering if Samson is a Catholic. It sounds like a Catholic view. And Brian Stevens, I met fifth graders who have accepted the truth. When I asked one how he drew his conclusion, he stated science. Interesting. So historical evidence is what Susan says. Yeah, I would agree. Historical evidence is compelling. I think the prophecies are very compelling. I tried to give you a few, but there's a lot more that are in the Bible that are pretty great. So if someone said Jesus never split the moon in two, so obviously he's not God. So that is a belief that Muhammad did, apparently. And so I think there's a lot of arguments against the Muslim faith. And I think the best person to go to and listen to those is David Wood. So David Wood has a wonderful channel called Acts 17 Apologetics. And he does an amazing job going through the Quran and looking at very specific information in the Quran. One of the things that the Muslims say is that Jesus, a lot of them believe that Jesus was taken away because there's a very obscure passage in the Quran that talks about Jesus's crucifixion. And they said that God took Jesus up to heaven prior to the crucifixion. So what a lot of Muslims do to reconcile that is they say that somebody else must have taken Jesus's place on the cross. And I don't buy that because obviously the people who were around at the time said Jesus was crucified on the cross, and early historians and other people who externally to the Bible and internally to the Bible pointed out that he was crucified. And so just that in and of itself to me brings a Muslim faith to be a falsehood. But actually what's also really interesting, if any of you want to look into the Muslim faith, is I looked into the Muslim faith and what they think about our book of Revelation, because they use a lot of our Bible. And they have their Christ, their version of Christ is called the Mahdi, M-A-H-D-I. And interestingly, the Mahdi is, the way that they describe their Mahdi is consistent with the way we describe our Antichrist in the book of Revelation. And they even point to the book of Revelation to support their view of the Mahdi, who's going to deny the Christ, and Christ is going to be subservient to him. And also the Mahdi is supposed to force conversions of every person on the world, in the world. So I think that's interesting. So thank you. Do I have a Patreon? I don't think I think I did set up a Patreon once, but I have to go back and look at that. But thank you, John. That's really nice. I appreciate it. The Quranic God is a mushrik. He associated a created being with him in creatorship. That seems interesting. Or Lutheran. Yeah, so that's another thing. So maybe I'll take a couple of more questions if anyone would like to ask any more questions or point anything out. I had an interesting thing that occurred yesterday. So I was going to debate Skylar Fiction on his, on the Modern Day Debate channel next Sunday at 8 o'clock at night. And it was supposed to be on objective morality. I created a really beautiful slide deck to explain my position on objective morality, which has been refined quite a bit since the last time I did a debate on that over the summer. And so what happened was, Amelia, I don't know about that question. So what happened was Skylar decided to make this video with a picture of me that he had superimposed a really awful outfit, some canary colored, old sea hag lady's outfit on. And he said that this is from the thing Clueless, a movie I've never seen. And he said that he pointed to that and he called me clueless. And he ran this video last night where he basically sort of roasted me, which Susan is in the chat. She saw this video. And so I decided that I don't think debating Skylar is a really good idea. So what I'm going to do instead is tomorrow at 1:30, I'm going to put out my slides. So if any of you would like to come and listen to that, I've got some really good slides on objective morality. I think we can make a very good case for objective morality and also for the source of objective morality. And so you'll see all that tomorrow if you happen to join in. So what do we see here? So what do you think about the watchmaker analogy? Sean Fry says, and I think if you look at the watchmaker analogy, it points to there should be a maker. I think that the version that's put out by Richard Dawkins in his book, The God Delusion, I think that's sort of missing the mark in the logical sequence. If you have a watch, you attribute that to a designer, just like if you have design in our DNA, you attribute it to a designer. And so I think that just seems I think that seems fair. Do I pray in tongues? No, I don't. I'm not into tongues. I just don't understand it. I'm not against if anyone finds that works for them. I've never seen anyone do that. And I'm very skeptical of that for some reason. So, because I guess I haven't, here's why I'm skeptical, because I grew up with a woman in the Catholic faith a long time ago. She's a mother of some friends of mine, and she was always trying to get us to talk about Christianity, and she's a really good person. But I heard from some other friends that she and her daughter used to go and speak in tongues, and we just thought that was very strange. So so that's basically, so that's sort of my skepticism towards speaking in tongues. But I do know that it was in the Bible that it happened, and it's possible. So I wouldn't want to rule it out. So Skylar did say he would do the debate yesterday. Yes, no, Skylar still wants to do the debate, but I'm just not sure about debating Skylar, because here I went on his channel out of good conscience last year. And so then he comes out with a video to review what I did last year when I went on his channel, and he's got Dr. Josh in there with him. And basically they spent the whole time starting off with calling me clueless, and then sort of trying to trash a lot of the things I was saying and make me look pretty bad. And I thought, well, Jesus, this is how you treat people who come on your channel. What happens when I go on to debate with you next week? What's going to happen after that? And I don't think it's the best way to spread the Christian good news if we're getting in debates with people that think that it's funny to basically trash your opponent in sort of, I would say, immature ways. And so that's what I feel about that. Oh, and James Williams says he can speak in tongues, and he's saying some German numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So let's say people can speak in tongues. What is the purpose of it? That's a good question. I think that the idea of speaking in tongues is, I think that some of that comes to speaking in other languages. And one of the things that they mention in the book of Acts, for example, is the apostles suddenly had this ability to speak multiple languages. So they could speak to the crowds in their own language. And that was one of the ways that people were converted, because they thought, holy cow, how is this even possible? So the fact that they were able to switch up languages and do that kind of stuff. And I think that's one of the reasons why the early church took off like a fire, is because there was miracles right up front. We had the apostle Peter, in the name of Jesus, walk and saying things like that. So the apostles were producing miracles, and the apostles basically were speaking in other people's languages. And so hearing those stories and that sort of thing, I think really impressed people who were living during those times. And that's one of the reasons it grew. And also, of course, if there weren't a supernatural force behind it, as Gamaliel said, they would have just dispersed, as other similar faiths had done. When people came and they pretended they were the Lord and they died, the faiths dispersed. So, and Sarah, she goes by Stupid, and I feel bad for Sarah with that name, but she said she's Sarah. She said she can speak with her tongue. And Brother John says tongues is another language in the Bible, not the gibberish BS today. So yeah, that's sort of my interpretation too. I'm thinking, or gibberish, I should say. I'm thinking that that's the same thing, that in the Bible, it seemed like they were speaking other languages that you could understand. But when people speak in tongues today, a lot of times they speak in a language that nobody can understand. And so that tends to be a reason why I'm critical of it. Some people say that that is the language of the angels, and suddenly they have this revelation to be able to speak the angels' language. I don't know. And that's a question that's out there. So do I believe the angel of the Lord is? Yes, I do. Actually, Samson, I've written blogs on that. I definitely believe that there's signs in the Bible that the angel of the Lord is the pre-human Jesus. He's even referenced himself as the Lord in those appearances that are in the Old Testament. So I have that. And yes, I am a Baptist, Sarah. So I'm a Baptist right now. And so your refusal to answer a question, do I feel special when I defecate? That's such a bad question. So, I mean, come on. So no, I don't feel special really. Those types of moments, I don't think anyone really does. I think that's a fair thing to say. So that's kind of silly. So only a female would ask another female that kind of question. So yeah, Samson says, don't be disgusting. That's just not really good. So uh, let me ask you this out there in the crowd. If any of you, I think I might have a mix here of believers and non-believers. So what do we have here? So we have it looks like Samson is a believer. I know Susan is. Do I believe homosexuality is a choice? Oh, that's a tough question all of a sudden out of the blue. I believe that there are nature and nurture reasons for homosexuality. So I believe that I've read, actually, there's some studies that talk about if you're a male and you have more older brothers, there's a bigger chance for you to be a homosexual, and it has something to do with the maternal track in the birth process. So there is something with that people have found. And so there's some nature to it. But I also believe there could be some nurture to it, because I've seen studies, like, for example, I just finished Dr. Brown's book, Jezebel's War with America. And he talked about some studies, and he said that it could also have to do with your upbringing in some way. Like, for example, if you're not brought up with a strong father figure, there could be a bigger chance for people to be homosexual. So that's something that is out there that's pretty interesting. And so Brian Stevens says he's agnostic. And so, and Brother John is an agnostic pantheist. Interesting. So, and Ginger Ale says she speaks in tongues and it helped grow spiritually. Okay. So yeah, I don't want to say that, I don't want to rule anything out that is in the Bible. So I think that it's fair to do more investigation. That's definitely an area I'd like to do a lot more investigation. So did I watch C.S. Lewis Doodles that you sent me? I think I did. Was that a while ago, Stephen? I think I did see that. I've seen so much in C.S. Lewis. Have I been witnessed to by a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness? No, I haven't. That's a great question. Thank you, Sarah, for your donation too. But I haven't, and I wanted to. In fact, one time I was in my house and I saw them. I don't know if they were Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons, but they were very well-dressed young men, and they were coming down my street. And I sat there with my Bible in the front door waiting for them to show up, and they never came as far down my street to my house. So I was really bummed because I had a lot of questions to ask them. So, but I can say I've been to, and I know very few people who are Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses. I met some Mormons when I was in Utah, and I can say something about their faith. The Mormon faith is pretty good in some ways, as far as helping people with a good lifestyle and to give back. A lot of Mormons actually, in their college years, they go and they do some ministering around the world. A lot of them will go and they'll work as missionaries. And so I think there's some good issues with the Mormon faith, although I just don't believe it, because I don't believe that the angel Moroni appeared, or if there is an angel, I'm not sure that angel was an angel of positive light, because what was preached by the angel Moroni goes against the Bible, and the Bible says very specifically that you shouldn't listen to, you should test everything, and if something does go against the Bible, it's probably not true. So Brother John says he was a Christian for 30 years. Wow. And so Arians and polytheists, if the earth was indeed flat, would you accept it, Brian Stevens? Do we have any flat earthers here in the crowd? So that's a pretty good question. Check out Living Waters movie, Noah 180. So come to Jesus. Yeah, and I can tell you guys something. Let me just say something personally, because a lot of times I give these arguments that I just gave at the very end of this video, or I talked about things like the cosmological argument, but just go back into your own lives. If you feel like, and a lot of people, I've had friends on Twitter, for example, tell me that there's a couple of them who tell me they're agnostic, and they say they're agnostic because they really don't feel like they can live by Jesus's rules. And I have a feeling that maybe they'll be agnostic for a while, and then maybe towards the end of their lives, if they're lucky to still be alive, they'll make a change to keep themselves from going to hell, if you put it that way. But I don't think that's the way to look at it. Christ is very forgiving, and he hung out with prostitutes and some of the lowest level people in society. He hung out with the tax collector, who was basically someone people scorned. And so Jesus told us that you basically don't have to be perfect. You just have to be faithful. You do have to try to act in positive ways. You have to follow his messages and his lead. But I don't think it's a good idea if you're agnostic for that reason, by just saying, I'm not going to go for Christianity because I can't live like that. So I don't think that's really the best idea. Have I investigated how similar human fallopian tubes, what's these questions, are to chimpanzees? No, I actually can't say I've done that investigation of human fallopian tubes and chimpanzees. So really interesting. So that's certainly something to investigate. Now, that speaks to the idea that there's a controversy in the Christian community over whether or not people should accept evolution as theorized by Darwin initially and by others more recently. And I think that it's not something that I care that much about. It's not my big argument. The Catholic Church and the Mormon faith basically say that yes, evolution is something that could have happened and that's perfectly fine. Other faiths like young earth creationists tend to reject evolutionism. But to me, it really doesn't matter. I'd accept it if we have compelling proof. Some people say we do have compelling proof. So in that case, I would accept it. I don't see it as going against anything in the Bible, because to me, it was pointed out in Genesis, the animals came before humankind. And I think that's consistent with evolution. If God wanted to use that process to deliver us, that's perfectly fine. I love the fact that we are made in God's image. So we're all made in God's image, which is pretty amazing. And that's what distinguishes humans from all of the other animals on the planet. So if the Mormons knock on my door, I should ask them about Kolob, James Williams said, and how many celestial planets there are for a believer. Really, I don't even know what that is. So interesting. Yeah, they have some really interesting beliefs in the Mormon faith. Something about honeybees coming to America and a big fight that happened, I think, about 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, or no, about 1,000 years ago. They have some interesting things. And the things that I've heard about that faith, they haven't been able to support. Like, for example, with the honeybees, they weren't able to show that honeybirds were in America at the time when Joseph Smith said they were in the Book of Mormon. So if we only have secondhand news parts of Jesus's 3-year life, maybe he means 3-year ministry, how can you be sure that the other 30-year, okay. We only have secondhand parts of 3 years of Jesus' life. How can we be sure of the other 30 years? I think that's a really good question. And so, how I would answer that is I would look to Jesus's own brothers. So he had 2 brothers that are mentioned in the Bible. There's the book with Jude and there's a book with James. James is Jesus's half brother. And what was really interesting is his brothers tried to stop his ministry while he was ministering. They thought he was crazy. And for the Bible authors to admit that is taking a lot when you think they're trying to sell this message. And they thought that it was completely crazy that Jesus was ministering, and they tried to stop him. And then what happened, which is really interesting, is Jesus appeared to his brother. That was mentioned by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15. And when Jesus appeared to his brother was in a very unique position to know whether or not Jesus had committed sins. And so when he wrote his book, you can see the writings from a brother who knew Jesus his whole life, proclaiming Jesus as Lord. And so I think that that's a great evidence that Jesus was without sin, that even his own brother was willing then to eventually die for him. He was actually a high priest in Jerusalem. And he preached and he was killed as documented by Josephus. And Josephus also lived in Jerusalem at the same time. So a lot of this is very clear-cut evidence of Jesus' ministry and also his sin-free nature. And the other thing that differentiates us is we're made in, what is this? Are we so damn immoral because we're made in God's image? No, that the fact we're made in God's image is also relates to the idea that we should aspire to be more moral and more like Jesus. And so I would say that. So John Loyne says, I challenge Brian Stevens to debunk the flat earth. Evolution has been exposed. The globe has been exposed. Earth has been shown to be the center of the universe. Please watch The Principle. Okay, interesting. Is there a Mormon in the group? We have to know that. I think Amelia's a little hung up on something that's really unpleasant. I don't think that spirits do that. So I would say that that's one of those things. Do not think know why I left. Oh, this is good. I will be polite when I say this. Do not think to know why I left the Mormon church. Do not assume you have a clue to any of it. Now, hate to disappoint you. I was never hurt by anyone. That's from James Williams. Yeah, I feel like there's I have there's a person I work with in my university, and he is an atheist. And not only is he an atheist, he writes books on atheism, on the ways to bring more secularism and get rid of Christianity in universities. And so he actually is at my university taking very specific steps and getting in all the committees that he can really influence the changes and things that are going on in my university. So for example, one of the, and I'm just mentioning this because he's also an ex-Mormon, and he is extremely critical of the Mormon faith. He actually goes to conferences. He was in one that was in Orlando that I think Seth Andrews and Aaron Ra were also at, and he was a speaker, this person at my workplace. And what he does now is he gets on these committees in my work, and one of the committees, he approves people's research projects. He's one of the approvers in the IRB, the Institutional Review Board at my school. So in one of my projects, I asked people, for example, they had to fill out a validated questionnaire that I had gotten from another person, because that's what we do. We find other people's validated questionnaires, other researchers, and we use some of the same questions, you know, if we're allowed to do that. And if they put them out in academic journals, you are. And so we put that out there with the questions were from Shalom Schwartz, and they had gender issues. Like you're either answering it as a male or you're answering the questions as a female. And Shalom Schwartz made it an important thing to distinguish those. So when I put those questions to this person who was on that committee, he rejected it and said, I have to have other options, many other options. And I said, well, I can't, because I'm using a validated tool that someone else had developed. And so that's just an example of the sort of thing that he does in these roles at our university. And he does, and people like him do those sorts of things in other universities. So now we've got a lot of stuff going on with that. That's pretty interesting. So wait, I think I saw, did you open, do you believe the human nature of Jesus is from Mary? Yes, I think that's fair to say. I would say that Mary was a virgin, and so and Jesus is from the seed of a woman, which is something in Genesis. A lot of people say, well, we're all from the seed of a woman. Well, the reference in Genesis is actually talking about the seed referring to sperm. So instead of, or normally people are from the seed of a man coming from sperm. In the case in Genesis, it's mentioning Jesus was from the seed of a woman, and that was coming out of the woman with the Immaculate Conception. So there's that too. Doesn't a sphere always appear flat no matter what the angle? So I think we've got some flat. At some point, if anyone is in the chat would like to come onto my channel sometime and chat about some of these topics that you'd like to develop, or if you're interested, I mean, I'll be interested in even bringing a flat earther on if you're interested in talking about why you believe in the flat earth. I think there's very compelling evidence against the flat earth position, but I'm willing to hear you out. And so that's something I'll be willing to do. I also would be interested in bringing in anybody who wants to talk about how they made the choices they did with respect to their beliefs. So why you're a Christian, or why you're an ex-Muslim, or any of those kind of things. I'm very interested in that. I'm also going to be around for the next couple of weeks because I don't have to go back to teach until, actually I go back on the 14th for a quick weekend teaching with EMBAs, but then I'm not back again until about the 21st. So I've got some time. So if anyone is interested in coming on my channel, just send me an email or just put something here. You can reach me at alwayslearning1225@gmail.com if you're interested in doing that. Or you can reach me on Twitter at LEAD1225. Or any other place like that. So let's see what else. It looks like there's an interesting bunch of questions here. Brother John says flat earth debates are a waste of time. Brother John, I would actually be interested in hearing why you're an ex-Muslim and or ex-Christian. I don't remember if you're the one who's an ex-Muslim or ex-Christian, but I would be interested in hearing that. A real flat earther will clean my clock, according to Susan. Possibly, who knows? But and then Susan, you're another one I'd like to have on here sometime. Actually, a lot of you in the chat. I've had Brian Stevens in conversations before, and he's a very pleasant person to be around. And of course, Sarah, she's mentioned before that I think she wanted to chat sometime. So I'd be interested in seeing Sarah too. And so, or any of you. So we will go from there. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and end this stream, but I want to say thank you so much, everybody, for your time. Tomorrow, I'll be back on at 1:30 again and talking about objective morality and some really good arguments you can make in debates. If any of you get into a debate with a person who's arguing for moral relativism. Moral relativism is the idea that we don't have any objective standards against which to judge people. And I've got some arguments that I think are pretty powerful. And so I hope that you'll come and listen to that, and it will be running live. And Brother John, next year, sure. Yeah, next year's right around the corner. So that sounds wonderful. So thank you. Brother John, you can reach me on again, at alwayslearning1225@gmail.com, and we can set something up if anyone else wants to. I'm more than willing to chat with people and bring you on my channel, give you a platform to talk about your views and all that kind of good stuff. So thank you so much. Thank you, John Lloyd. And everybody have a blessed day. Bye-bye.